You know, all four of the Gospels really are the story of the last week of Jesus' life, including his dying and rising, with a really long introduction up to it. And in fact, most of the Gospels, it's at least a quarter of the book. John, it's almost half of the book. But that makes it hard to move from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday. You kind of miss what's in the middle. And we read it at our Good Friday service. But between now and when we celebrate Jesus' ascension, we're going to go back and read all of the stories that happened between Jesus entering Jerusalem triumphantly as king and him rising from the dead. We're going to reread that whole section. So here's what's happening during this week. Jesus took over the temple for the week that we call Holy Week. It was a special week. He used the temple as his own place to teach, which he has every right to do because it's his house. But while he was in charge of the temple, the leaders did not like it. They wanted him out and they wanted him dead. And the people know that Jesus is the one who was to come, or at least they're saying that as he comes in. And Jesus is there, and Luke tells us that this is what he did. He's preaching the gospel this week. And my question is, what does it look like to preach the gospel before Jesus died and rose again? Like, we just summarized the gospel. How can we see Jesus is preaching the gospel in what he says? And then Luke tells us what they talked about. And so as we read this, be asking the question, how is this preaching the gospel to us? Another thing Jesus is going to do is affirm that his authority is from God. It's a challenge from the leaders over who has the right to be in charge at the temple. And notice as Jesus responds, his answers have to do with him being God's son and with his ability to make us into God's sons too. Okay? He's preaching the gospel, he's confirming his authority, and he's talking about being God's son who makes us God's sons. One day, Jesus was teaching the people in the temple courts and preaching the gospel. The chief priests and the teachers of the law, together with the elders, came up to him. "Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things?" they said. "Who gave you this authority?" So Jesus replied, "I will ask you one question. Tell me, John's baptism, was it from heaven or from men?" They discussed it among themselves and said, "If we say from heaven, he will ask, 'Why didn't you believe him?' But if we say from men, all the people will stone us because they're persuaded John was a prophet." So they answered, "We don't know where it was from." And Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." Okay, the question is, where is this authority coming from? Because who normally has the authority here? It's the chief priests, who are the Sadducees. They're the ones in charge of the temple. They're the teachers of the law. That's the Pharisees. They're the ones who are strict, really know God's word in their teaching. It's the elders, which has been the name of the miscellaneous leaders all the way back till Moses' time. When God talked to Moses at the bush, he said, "Go tell the elders." It's a generic word. That's who should be in charge, right? The priests, the teachers, and the elders. And Jesus says, nope, it's actually me who's in charge. And they say, "Why are you doing these things?" These things include all that's happened. Why did you ride into town as a donkey, let your followers praise you? Why did you kick the money sellers out like you think the temple is your house or something? Why are you here preaching and teaching, preaching the gospel here? And Jesus does a couple things with his answer here. The first thing Jesus does is to say it's cheating to have two different intellectual weights and measures. You know, in the Old Testament, it says, if you're buying something and you've got one weight, this is my pound I use for buying things, and then you switch it out for a different weighted item when you're going to sell it, so that you're buying more and selling less, that's a form of ripping people off. And it's like we have this intellectual weights and measures. If we're going to demand that someone else be logical, we need to be logical too. And Jesus says, if you're going to ask me where I came from, you got to be willing to say where you think I came from. or rather, John the Baptist. But now, Jesus isn't bringing up John the Baptist randomly. Remember that when Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, a voice came from heaven that said, "This is my son whom I love." In the Transfiguration, it adds, "Listen to him." Okay? So he's saying, remember John's baptism when a voice came from heaven and said who I was? Do you believe that? And they're saying, we don't, but we can't tell you that because we're afraid of the people. The people are kind of in charge right now. Do you notice that? The leaders are afraid of the people, and so they're letting Jesus be the boss. Okay? So what's the gospel here? Jesus is reminding us of his baptism. Remember that from the beginning of Jesus' ministry, when he comes out, we can learn so much about God at that original spot. We see the Trinity there, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. We see that Jesus is the one who was to come, the Son. But we also see Jesus' ministry is to join the line of sinners, to take our sin and give us his righteousness. That's been there since the beginning. And he's reminding them of all of that, and they're saying, we don't want to comment on why that's happening. But do you hear Jesus preaching the gospel? It's veiled, but that's what he's reminding them of. These facts that are already there from John the Baptist. So then, Jesus went on to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard, and he rented it to some farmers, and he went away for a long time. And at harvest time, he sent servants to the tenants so that they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. He sent another servant, but that one also they beat and treated shamefully and sent away empty-handed. He still sent a third, and they wounded him and threw him out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my son, whom I love. Perhaps they will respect him." But then the tenants saw him. They talked the matter over. "This is the heir," they said. "Let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. First of all, do you notice that Jesus put the words into the vineyard owner's mouth that God said to him at his baptism? He hasn't changed topics. He's reminding the leaders here still, if you had believed that John's baptism was from heaven, you would have heard or heard about these words coming from God saying that I'm his son, and you'd believe them. But you don't believe John, so you're not going to believe me. That's there right in this parable. Next, this parable is actually an adaptation of a parable that comes from Isaiah 5. The vineyard is the house of Israel, and the owner of the vineyard is actually called the Lord of the vineyard. It's God. And the house of Israel, when we think of the house that Israel had, we think of the people, the family of Israel. But Jesus is also in the temple. You could call the temple itself the house that they're in, the house of the Lord, the house of Israel. There, that's where he's telling this story. And what he wants to come from this vineyard is fruit. And in the parable in Isaiah 5, the vineyard won't produce fruit until finally the vineyard owner cuts down the vines. John the Baptist, at his preaching in Luke 3, said, guys, if you don't produce fruit, the tree's going to get cut down. He's extending that. But Jesus changed this parable. Here's the twist Jesus put on it. It's not the plants who won't give the produce, it's the people who won't give the produce. He's saying that the leaders are the ones who won't give it to him. And the authority that is here, Jesus puts himself, reminds us, he's been in a long line of prophets who have come and not been listened to by the leaders. All of the prophets have been rejected. And there's been times when the Jewish people were more open about this, and I've read that during Jesus' time, people were more going, oh yeah, we really did a bad job of following the prophets that were coming. That's a hard thing to be able to say. Okay, then they say, let's kill him. Do you know that's a quote from Joseph's brothers? Let's kill him. The Israelites have been killing their saviors since all the way back to Genesis. This is a connection here. And God is the one who is able to work through things that people mean for evil to work them for good. And it's always been that way, and it is now. Okay, it's so easy to think about other people, but Jesus says that he's about to say that he's going to make sure he gets his fruit no matter what. He's going to come with other tenants here, which means we're in the position of these tenants. Okay, it's easy to look bad about these tenants. Think about this for just a moment. God's people, including us, are in danger of this: saying to God, in order to avoid giving you the fruit of obedience to your law, we're willing to kill you. We know we're in trouble, and the only way we have no fruit, no good fruit to give, and our only solution is to get rid of you, to kill you. That's it. That's what they're doing here. Are we in danger of doing that? So here's the grand irony. The one who's coming, that they're saying, we don't want him, we're going to kill him, he's the one who has all the fruit of righteousness. And he's giving it to us, and he's doing it through his dying. And we're going to see that in his explanation. Jesus is preaching the gospel through this parable. What then will the owner, the Lord of the vineyard, do to them? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When the people heard this, they said, "May this never be." Jesus looked directly at them and asked, "What then is the meaning of that which is written? The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone," from Psalm 118, the same psalm they were quoting to him at his triumphal entry. Jesus said, "Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, but he on whom it falls will be crushed." The teachers of the law and the chief priests looked for a way to arrest him immediately because they knew he had spoken this parable against them, but they were afraid of the people. The people are still in charge here. Okay? In the parable, it's the Lord of the vineyard who's in charge. And parables invite us to pronounce our own doom. If you look at a parable and you say, yep, that's the bad guy, and bad stuff should happen to the bad guy in the parable, then the prophet says to us, as Samuel said to David, "You are the man in the parable." And they get it. They know that they are the tenants in the parable. And interestingly, the leaders understand the parable and are willing to fulfill the parable even after understanding it. Jesus is the Son in the parable, and then Jesus calls himself the stone from Psalm 118. They said, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," or the one who comes in the name of the Lord. John the Baptist, when he sent his disciples to talk to Jesus while he was in jail, he quoted this same psalm. He said, "Jesus, are you the one who was to come?" And Jesus is the one who was to come from Psalm 118. Jesus is the stone. The Messiah, the Christ, the Anointed One, is the stone. And in this psalm, God is proposing this stone to be the main stone of the building that all the other stones line up to. And Pastor Dan shared when we use that as our worship text, there's some argument about whether that's the bottom stone of the foundation or the last one to go on top. But the point about this stone is that it's the squaring up one that holds the shape of everything together. Whether it's the bottom one or the top one or both, that's what the job of this stone is. It's the one you square to. It's the one that if you're not in line with, they're going to come by and they're going to chop that rock off so that it fits. You've got to fit to this stone. And Jesus says we can either fall on this stone or this stone will fall on us. Either way, we're coming in line with this stone. We're either going to break and fit to the pattern of this stone and be included in the wall, or we're going to have this stone come down on us and crush us to powder. Either way, this stone is going to have its way. It will be the one that squares this wall up. Jesus is inviting us to get in line with him now so that we're not crushed by him later. And you know what? This stone, or a stone, is mentioned in Daniel 2 as being a stone that comes in and crushes all the kingdoms of the world. Jesus rolls in as a stone in Daniel 2 and is set up as the permanent kingdom of the world. Also in Isaiah 8, God says he is the stone. Okay, so we've got the stone, that's the Messiah, that's God's kingdom, that is somehow also the Lord. This is the gospel Jesus is preaching. And you know what? He's rejected by the leaders, killed outside of the vineyard, and then brought back in by God, raised up, and raises a whole building around it. This is Jesus preaching the gospel again. This is what God is doing through Jesus. Now we get into a question battle. Keeping a close watch on Jesus, they sent spies who pretended to be honest, and they hoped to catch Jesus in something he said so that they might hand him over to the power and authority of the governor. So the spies questioned him, "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right, and that you do not show partiality, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. So we just had one question. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" Do you hear them buttering him up? That is just like transparent flattery there. He saw through their duplicity and he said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose portrait and inscription are on it?" "Caesar's," they replied. He said to them, "Then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And they were unable to trap him in what he had said in public. And astonished by his answer, they became silent. Okay, so do you understand how this trap is supposed to work? You either can get in trouble with the Jewish authorities or the Roman authorities, but the claim is one of these two authorities, you have to submit either to us or to Rome. Which one is it going to be? Do you want to use this idolatrous graven image coin to give to Caesar, or do you want to avoid that idolatry and not pay your taxes and go to jail for tax evasion? Which one is it? You got to pick one. And Jesus sidesteps the issue by saying, whose picture is on this coin? Says it's Caesar's. So, okay, so let me get this straight. You have a problem with taking a coin that you think is idolatrous because it's got Caesar's face on it, which for some reason you have in your pocket here in the temple. Let's not bring that up for a moment. But you have a problem with taking this idolatrous coin and giving it back to the guy who made it. I don't have any problem with that. But here's the thing. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. Who is God's image? People are. Only give yourselves to God. Don't give yourselves to Caesar. Give Caesar his money, but don't give yourself to Caesar. Okay? That's what it's saying. If the government wants their money back, you got to give them their money back. But don't give yourselves to the government. But there's one step deeper here. Who is the ultimate image of God? The perfect image of God. It's Jesus. Jesus is the image of God. And what are they wanting to do with Jesus? They want to hand him over to the authority of the governor. They want to take Jesus, who is perfectly God's image, and hand him over to Caesar's representative to kill him. They have no problem handing over God's image to Caesar to have him killed, but they object to giving Caesar his money back. That's duplicity. This is the word for hypocrisy, pretending. And Jesus is again preaching the gospel, because as they're doing that, the handing him over will be the way that we are saved. Ironically. And they can't handle this. That group gets quiet. This is a silencing competition. If you lose, you can't talk anymore. Okay? So a new group comes. Some of the Sadducees, who say there's no resurrection, came to Jesus with a question. "Teacher," they said, "Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and have children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first one married the woman and died childless. The second and then the third married her, and the same way the 7 died, leaving no children. Finally, the woman died too, and then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married to her?" And Jesus replied, "The people of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of taking part in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are they given in marriage. They can no longer die, for they are like the angels. They are God's children, since they are children of the resurrection. For any of you who are in Sunday school, do you hear the question being asked? Can you show us from the Old Testament that the resurrection is true? Here's Jesus' answer. But in the account of the bush, even Moses showed that the dead rise, for he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all are alive. Some of the teachers of the law, that's the Pharisee group, responded, "Well said, teacher," and no one dared to ask him any more questions. Okay? Do you see how the authority issue is here coming? This time it's the priest party coming. They don't believe that anyone's going to rise from the dead. They also want to go back just to the first 5 books of the law. They quote Moses and say, what we have here this is called an argument to absurdity. They say, if the resurrection happened, it would create this absurd situation where one woman is legally married to 7 men. That's absurd. Moses wouldn't allow that. Therefore, there must be no resurrection. And Jesus says it doesn't work like that. You can't pick and choose, because this same Moses, who you're going to quote from, when he talked to God at the burning bush, the first conversation he had with him, God introduces himself as the God, the current God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who are dead. And it's almost like God is saying, I've got them up here with me. You want me to put them on the phone? Like, they're right here with me. Who are you? I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm right here. And throughout Jesus' teaching, Jesus says things like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will be there at the final resurrection. They're the ones whose feast you're going to. He tells the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, who's already feasting with Abraham even before he comes to life. The whole Old Testament shows that picture, and you can go right back to the very first conversation Moses had with Abraham that shows that there is a resurrection. Do you see why this is part of preaching the gospel? Jesus is saying, not only can I rise, but I can raise other people from the dead, and there will be life eternally. This is all part of the gospel. Also, do you notice that the vineyard was a question over who gets to inherit it? They're going to steal it from the son. In their analogy, there's no one left alive to inherit. There's no inheritance happening in heaven because there's no children to inherit it. It's all over. It's gone. And Jesus says, no, I'm the son of the vineyard owner, the son of the Lord of the vineyard. And I can raise you to life and give you the inheritance along with me. I'm the Son of God, and I can make you God's children too. And then the conclusion happens with Jesus getting the last question. Here's Jesus' question. Jesus said to them, "How is it that they say the Christ is the son of David? Because David himself declares in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." That's from Psalm 110. David calls him Lord, so how can he be his son? In Hebrew, there's 2 words for Lord. In Greek, which Jesus is speaking, there's just 1 word for Lord being used here. It's the same word for the Lord of the vineyard, but it's also the name of God translated in the Old Testament. And Jesus is quoting David as a source of authority here. Have you noticed that? The sources of authority are John the Baptist, then the prophets, not Caesar. Then Moses was called as a witness. Now David is being called as a witness. But if you look closely, David's quoting someone. It's the Lord. Ultimately, the witness is God. Who's giving Jesus his authority? God said to the Messiah, to the Christ, you are the Lord. If God calls the Messiah God, then he's God. That's Jesus' argument. And Jesus quotes this same verse, which, by the way, was quoted in one of our songs we sang this morning. This is the most quoted single verse in the New Testament, Psalm 110:1 of the Old Testament. Jesus quotes this at his trial. This is the week before he's saying, okay, guys, the Christ is God, according to the Bible. And that at his trial, they say, but are you the Christ? And he says, yes, I'm the Christ I was talking about from Psalm 110:1 last week, meaning I'm God. And you know what they said? They understood what he said. They said, that's blasphemy. Let's kill him. You see that? He's establishing in advance that the Messiah, once I say I'm the Messiah, I'm the Christ, what I'm saying is according to the Old Testament, I'm also God. Let's just get that on the table before I tell you whether I'm the Christ or not. He's preaching the gospel, and he's the one inheriting. Do you see the other pieces that we have here? We've just talked about the resurrection. Jesus is going to get thrown out of the vineyard. He's going to die. He's going to be brought back like the stone the builders rejected. He'll be raised again. Now he's going to go back to heaven where he sits down at the right hand of God, and he reigns there until all of his enemies are taken care of, and he comes back to reign visibly. We've got the full rest of the story. Jesus is preaching the gospel to them through these conversations. Jesus spent the week affirming that his authority is from God and preaching the gospel that he is God's son who can make us into God's sons. And that's the story. This is the gospel. This worked. Jesus is God's son who died in our place. He's perfectly God's image. They handed him over to be killed, and he went there. He died for us. He was thrown out of the vineyard because we weren't producing fruit, and our solution was to blame him. He, the one who has all the perfect fruit, died in our place. He rose again, and God is building a house out of him. This worked. We've seen this story. He is risen. And because of that, I can tell you confidently that your sins are forgiven. That his rights to inherit have been given to you. I can say to you with confidence the same thing that God said to Jesus. In Jesus, you are God's son, God's child, and he loves you. And this is all true because of what Jesus did for us.